So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the fifth episode of the runZero Hour webcast. We went ahead and flipped over to hex numbering so that we don't ever have to expand it past 2 digits. We get like 20 years of monthly webcasts if we write it in hex. It's very useful. So I am Rob King. I'm the Director of Security Research here at runZero, and I am joined by this esteemed panel. Our CEO and source of all good bits, HD Moore. Hi, HD.
Yeah.
I am also joined. Oh, sorry, HD. I'm also joined by our principal researcher, Tom Sellers. Hello, Tom. Thank you for coming. And we also have with us Blaine Smith, a researcher who just joined. So this is Blaine's first runZero hour. So welcome, Blaine. It's nice to have you here.
Happy to be here.
So this month is what a month it has been. I feel like we have had more 0 days and more interesting information security happenings in the past, just this first quarter of 2024 than I've seen in many, many years. And I've been doing this a long time. So obviously the big thing that everyone's talking about, and it's been done to death, but it's important that we at least discuss it a little bit here, is the XZ liblzma systemd SSH backdoor. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is easily the biggest security story of the year. I hope we don't get anything bigger. What happened was on March 29th, a backdoor was announced in the XZ Utils package. It was publicly disclosed. And XZ Utils is, for those of you who aren't aware, it's a suite of compression tools built on the LZMA compression algorithm. It's widely used. It's used to compress packages. It's used to compress kernels. It's used to compress data of all types. And it's one of those packages that it's in everything and you don't realize it. And this was discovered by an independent researcher named Andreas Freund, and I'm sure I mispronounced that name and I apologize. And he discovered that SSH was starting up slightly slower, and he needed to figure out why. And pulling that thread led to it reads like a spy novel. It also reads like if anyone has read The Cuckoo's Egg help me out here. Someone has, right? Yeah. Okay. The Cuckoo's Egg is a very famous story by, was it Cliff Stoll, about hacking into a system. It reads like that. It reads like a thriller. It's a fascinating thing. And that it involves social engineering and sock puppetry and getting control of an open source project and getting commit access to this project and adding a backdoor. And then the mechanisms that were used to get this backdoor both in and active are fascinating. There's wonderful, wonderful timelines all over the web that I recommend you read. But it's been truly fascinating. But the upshot of it is that this code did make it into some public releases, mostly betas and rolling releases and things like that. But it was out there. And what it did was, on systems that were using systemd linked to liblzma, running SSH under systemd, someone in possession of a specific key was able to gain access via SSH to these systems, the attacker being the person in possession of that key, or attackers. And it allowed execution of arbitrary code, reading and writing of files, all sorts of fascinating things. And it used the mechanisms it used to bypass protections, also fascinating. And so let's start with, we kind of covered how did it happen. Let's start with, is it as bad as maybe they say? Because this has been an enormous story, but is it as bad as people maybe think? And HD, I'm going to ask you that one.
Yeah, the good news is we all got lucky, right? Because the backdoor was identified before it made it into the major releases. Only a few folks running rolling distributions were affected by it. It also made it very easy for us to figure out what machines might have been affected, which we'll go into a little bit later. But yeah, short versions, we got really lucky.
We did. It was the last possible moment that it could have been caught before it made it worldwide. It is funny because there is a lot of hype around it, and justifiably so. But I remember I was looking at YouTube, and people were saying Linux is completely destroyed, and it's the world is over, and it thankfully wasn't quite that bad. But I do think that it opens up, or it's really opened up a lot of people's eyes to the risks of supply chain attacks and what it means to be a supplier in this industry now. So I guess the question now is it going to happen again? Has it happened again? And HD, I'm going to ping you on that one too. I think there was you had mentioned something.
Yeah, an article came out just today by the OpenJSF folks, and they mentioned that they've actually noticed similar attempts to hijack projects in the OpenJS ecosystem with almost exact same, tells, like folks using Puppet accounts trying to take over other people's projects as maintainers, indicating there's, a false sense of urgency to take over because of a upcoming vulnerability. So this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. Like there's probably lots of successful attempts out there to backdoor projects we don't know about yet. There's probably lots of activities that are currently in progress. The Utils issue was particularly disturbing because it was a 3-year effort of creating this sock Puppet account and this custom identity. And if you want to look for any other indication that this person existed in the world, there's nothing. Like it's really hard to be a developer for 3 years and your personal email address not to be associated with something besides the one project you work on the internet. And that was the case here.
Yep, there was the meme I saw floating around on Mastodon was big Giatan energy. If you're an open source maintainer and suddenly somebody says, "Boy, I really need you to work on this right now. This is absolutely critical," and you can say, "You know what?" And I'm getting Giatan feelings here. But so what's fascinating too about this problem is that it was incredibly well hidden. It's one of those things where if you didn't know exactly what to look for, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't find it. It was put into the code to spring the trap was placed in a GNU autoconf M4 file. And as someone who actually likes the M4 macro language and has actually written more than my fair share of M4, anyone who ever had to configure SynMail back in the late 90s knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's great. It's great. But these tend to be files that are code that is sort of ignored or glanced over at best. And this file was not placed in the GitHub repo. This file was placed in the release archive that was manually created. And the shell code, the backdoor code, was actually placed in an LZMA XZ test file. So it was just binary compressed data, right? So it really wouldn't be something that you would ever notice. And it was all couched behind normal, regular commits, good high quality commits, in fact. So you have to ask yourself then, how do you detect what systems could be vulnerable to this? And if you have access to the system, obviously you can jump on and you can look and see what files are getting linked to, and you can ask yourself, am I running systemd? Is this a Linux distribution that could even be affected, first off? And for the record, if you're not running systemd with SSH and a few other things, you are safe, but better safe than sorry. But then what do you do about all those devices all those systems that are just out there that you may not necessarily know about or have access to? A lot of these, the systems that were affected were rolling releases, what's the word, beta, things like that, where they tend to be used as one-off devices. They tend to be installed just temporarily as like, oh, I'm going to test this or whatever. And it might not actually be part of the proper IT organization. It might just be a VM, might be just a little laptop in the corner or something like that. And so we had to ask ourselves, here at runZero, what did we want to do? How could we detect what was going on? And so what we did was we thought, if only there were a way that we could identify these systems based on how they talked on the network. And spoiler alert, there's this beautiful partial spreadsheet here that Tom, I want to brag about, because I always want to brag about Tom because he's so great. But he came up with this really nice spreadsheet of data talking about how we could identify systems that were recent enough, running recent enough Linux kernel versions to be potentially vulnerable, and then looking at their SSH version announcement, what would colloquially be called the banner, but in this case, it's technically the SSH version negotiation string. And so what we came up with, and I always thought this was really beautiful, is this lovely query that says, okay, well, let's ask ourselves who's running SSH and who's running a kernel recent enough to do it, and who's running a recent enough version of SSH. And I don't want to pick on you too much, HD, but I keep doing it because you always give the best explanations here. Do you want to kind of explain a little bit about what this query is looking for?
Sure. Tom covered some of the MSS multiplier stuff in the last runZero hour, but starting here, you say, okay, find every service that is in the runZero inventory that has protocol SSH, regardless of what port it's on, whether it's 22, 22, or anywhere else that we detect SSH. Then also look for machines where in the TCP/IP handshake or the TCP handshake, the Windows scaling value came back as being exactly 7, and the TCP window size was exactly 31,856. And the MSS, and then or the multiplier was 22, or the multiplier was 23, and then it also had a banner in one of these particularly brand new versions. So what we're doing is saying only look for brand new versions of OpenSSH that probably haven't made it to mainstream releases, and then also only look at these specific TCP/IP attributes that are only present on newer kernels as well. And the combination of these brand new versions of OpenSSH with these particular kernel variants limits the detection to only the bleeding edge releases that were affected by the issue.
And so the benefit of this, thank you, HD, the benefit of this is it's kind of hard to explain how useful it is to say we can detect devices that IT might not even know about that fall into this potential vulnerability. Tom, did you want to add to that?
Oh, and I was just piping up to say that, the original guidance from some folks, including us, was, look for OpenSSH 9.6 because your Linux distributions that are new enough to be impacted would have this newer version of OpenSSH. The challenge we ran into there was there were other operating systems such as Mac OS, where if you're running the latest version of Mac OS, and you have SSH available, you're running OpenSSH 9.6. And so the Windows scale thing that HD was talking about there, Windows scale 7, that's purely Linux. Almost nothing else has Windows scale 7. So let us constrain that down to a little bit. And then the TCP win and the multiplier is the parts that constrain the kernel versions down to just the newest versions. So it's just an effort to kind of tighten that box down even smaller so we don't have false positives.
So only Linux has Windows scale 7, but then only produce weighing devices that run embedded Windows have Windows scale 7 or Windows 7 scale. Yes, there Correct. We go. So, yes, excellent. That was a joke, by the way. I don't actually know if there are any scales that run Windows C. There might be. I also want to point out that our Q&A is open. We've already had a few excellent questions, but please feel free to toss any questions you have. We can either answer them live or answer them via typing. HD, I think, has already caught one, so thank you, HD. So yeah, that is the XZ thing. I'm actually curious if anybody wants to drop into the Q&A. Were they affected by the XZ? Did anybody find any backdoored machines? I'm curious. I know that in my survey, I found not on my personal work, but I did find a few out there, which was a little scary. But yeah, the XZ thing highlights the importance of open source maintainers, highlights the importance of knowing your supply chain, and highlights just how much of a bullet we dodged. It was a fascinating thing. Highly recommend reading all about that when you get the chance. And also reach out to us if you have any questions on this query, because this is super cool. So unless does anybody have anything they want to add on to for the XZ topic? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next big thing. And that is, we are proud to announce the first volume of the runZero research report. And so the runZero research report is a compendium of things that the runZero research team wants to talk about. One of the things, my favorite thing about runZero is that we actually are a research-focused organization. And it makes me really proud to say that, because practical research is what we do and how we improve asset discovery and attack surface management, and all these things are all fruits of doing practical, hard research, finding blue sky, new ways of discovering things. And so this report is going to be launched in a matter of days, very soon, and is going to have some really interesting topics to discuss, including my personal favorite is the decay of segmentation. And I wanted to call it, in my mind, I keep calling this seg faulting or segmentation violation or whatever for you Unix people out there, or Linux. But yeah, the decay of segmentation. So what's fascinating about it, and I'm going to let HD chime in here in a second too, but it's, I think, something that runZero does better than anyone else in the world. And what it is, we all know that network segmentation is fundamental to information security. It's the idea that you can limit access and limit devices to certain parts of your network to act as containment for a blast radius, right? So if one of those devices gets compromised, or something gets broken into, or something is insecure, it's limiting into where they can go. But there's some interesting things in that a lot of devices do not necessarily maintain that segmentation. And it's a little surprising which devices might break that segmentation. My personal favorite is, well, actually, what's your personal favorite on that, actually?
I mean, one thing that's fun to look at is if you just have like a Mac OS machine, just type config. You'll see like 30 interfaces on an unconfigured brand new Mac OS box. Every one of those interfaces has potential to bridge between those different mediums, whether it's your wireless display link, your Bluetooth, your Ethernet, your Wi-Fi. But some of my favorite devices tend to be like the kind of like unknown in the corner hardware, things like network printers or camera systems. Like, strangely enough, these devices are often configured to forward IPv4 traffic between segments by default. Another really common misconfiguration that folks are just mostly unaware of right now is that when you install any kind of Docker utility on your development machine, well, your Docker networking interfaces need the ability to forward between them. So what they also do is they enable IP forwarding. So if you're running on a Linux machine and you install Docker, by default, you've now enabled IP forwarding on all your interfaces, unless you specifically set up firewall rules between them.
Yep. I've worked on many systems where a lot of people might not realize that with multiple interfaces, you often get IP forwarding enabled by default, or just by necessity to communicate with different pieces. And the firewall rules, you write these firewall rules that say, oh, okay, well, I need to protect against this, that, and the other, but you never have you might not have the realization that, the call is coming from inside the house, as it were. And it allows your printer, in this example, to reflect traffic. And what's interesting is even devices with multiple interfaces aren't necessarily required, right? Like, this can actually work even with devices that only have a single interface, because you can still get it to reflect some traffic back in a different way from its IP address. And so that's a way that it can break segmentation. It does no good to have the strongest firewall in the world and all these other things. It does some good if the printer in the lobby can just reflect traffic. And another topic that we're going to talk about in the research report is the concept of network dark matter. And I am a huge cosmology physics nerd. I like talking about space telescopes and the crisis in cosmology. Anybody who watches cosmological YouTube has heard that phrase a million times. And so dark matter, is this concept in cosmology that there's all this matter, it's a huge amount of matter in the universe that has gravitational influence. Its effects can be seen, but it's invisible to our best telescopes. So we don't know what it is. We don't know where it is. We don't know what it is. And so when we were doing over the years all of our research, we've discovered that an immense amount of equipment on networks is dark matter, for lack of a better term. And it's these devices that you wouldn't even notice necessarily. They come, they go, things like smart light bulbs, smart plugs, thermostats, things like that. No one notices if a smart plug appears and disappears. It's simple. But these devices are on your network and they can be felt. Their presence can be felt. And they can be used as a toehold for attackers. There's the famous story of, I want to say it was a Las Vegas casino. Am I right, with the aquarium pump in the lobby? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I believe that's it.
And yeah, which you never realize. I remember when I very first joined runZero, I scanned my house. Yeah, that was the first thing I did, obviously. And I was amazed by like, oh yeah, I totally forgot that I even had these 18 devices. It's kind of scary. And so as part of that dark matter, we also included this concept of marginal dark matter. And these are your devices that aren't necessarily going to be updated on a regular cadence. So they don't necessarily automatically upgrade themselves, or they don't necessarily get attention from the security team that they might otherwise get if they were sort of more of a mainline device. Like your servers, your switches, your routers, those get updates, those get managed. They speak SNMP, they're everywhere. People know about them. But what about the display adapters, the projectors in the conference rooms, things like that? These things now, in 2024, they all speak IP. They all talk. Every device is. They all indeed. Not only do they often not get updates, oftentimes they don't even have the option of getting updates. They may not even be able to be updated. It might be burned in and hard coded. I have an alarm system in my house that suffers from that exact problem. And it would actually cost more money to get it ripped out than it's kind of a pain, actually. I think it was Tom. It was Tom or HD was telling me that I should use the existing wiring to do something cool with my alarm system. So I've got this wiring, I should use it. That's true. But so we dug really, really deep into this network dark matter. And it was kind of interesting that the more we dug, the more we found, which is, I think, also like cosmology, and that we keep seeing more and more influence for dark matter and dark energy in the universe. And then also additionally, not finally, because there's a lot more sections, but also we include some really fascinating cybersecurity snapshots in the report. And these are where we can take runZero's very, very unique perspective to look at things that we can see that maybe no one else can see. Do things no one else can do, from Big Trouble in Little China. I'm trying to remember the exact quote. 5 demon bag. Anyway, but these cybersecurity snapshots touch on things like protocol, TLS stacks, protocol security, end of life versions, things like that. And what I find fascinating with runZero is that our explorers, these are these points of presence that sit on networks, and they can do all sorts of fascinating things. And I love writing code. I love designing things. I love scanning networks, and I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't mean it. It really is the best I've ever seen. It's so cool. It's so cool. But these explorers are on networks, and they can see things from a perspective that's actually from the defender's perspective. It's not, we're not scanning the public internet. We do that sometimes, but they're not scanning the world. They're scanning that network. They're exploring that network. They're passively sampling traffic from that network. They're getting data from integrations in that network. So there's this very unique, powerful perspective. And it lets us talk about some really interesting things, like how out of date software is, how adaptive things have been to, or how much things are improved when things like secure by default became a thing. How many people aren't following those defaults? Oh, Tom's raising what? Give me your quote, Tom, because you had that great quote.
Oh, in general, I just think defaults matter. Like, there's so many times whenever you've got folks who on IT or InfoSec that they're so busy and they're so under-resourced, and a lot of times, unless something is actively broken or actively on fire, they're not going to mess with it. And so when vendors make more secure defaults, that tends to have an impact on the environment, because unless it breaks something for somebody, it gets left in place. And over time, either through attrition of additional of existing devices or implementation of new devices, like, your environment becomes more secure. And that's something we do call out and report a couple of times with data, with examples, is how having secure defaults for key protocols can really increase the general security posture of your environment.
Yep. You're only as strong as your weakest link, kind of thing. So the cybersecurity snapshots is fascinating. It's I think by far the largest single part of the report, but it just goes really in depth, really data driven, lots of charts and graphs, lots of absolutely humorous and laugh out loud footnotes. And I know that because I wrote them and I'm hilarious. So be sure to check that out. And so this research report is going to be talked about quite a bit in San Francisco. So if you're going to be in San Francisco for RSA, or just for whatever reason, maybe you live in San Francisco, come by and see us. We're going to be there. You can meet us in person, me and HD. And we would love to be able to talk about it. We're going to be giving a panel discussion about the contents of the research report and all the cool stuff that the runZero research team is working on. And we will be, I believe I've got a link in the end, but we can also drop it in chat. Yep, there we go. Oh, and yes, Blaine raised the excellent point. Going back to the number of interfaces on mobile networks. Yes, that is a good point. So Blaine mentioned in the chat that your mobile phone has, let's see, just to count, talking about the segmentation, decay of segmentation. You've got your 5G, your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi, NFC. It's just, yeah, it's kind of hilarious. We're basically all carrying supercomputers in our pockets.
Yeah, and even to like connect back to what Tom was saying earlier about like secure defaults, I read like an anecdotal thing the other day that somebody's 2016 Subaru was trying to get updates over the 3G network, but that endpoint was turned off, so that car couldn't connect it and was killing the battery because it kept trying to connect over 3G, but nobody knew about that. And clearly, like, defaults weren't failing close once that occurred.
That's interesting. And I'm gonna, I'm sorry, go ahead, HD.
And hopefully nobody re-registers the domain that he was trying to connect to and starts providing malicious updates, right?
Right, yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, in that case, it was the cellular network altogether was toast. But I mean, it's still worth considering. There's a lot of vehicles now that are effectively hotspots, and they also have cellular links. So, and I think in some of those cases, it's intentionally forwarding from the Wi-Fi hotspot to the cellular link. So you get basically mobile pivot pretty much everywhere.
It's kind of, and this is, I'm going to do some OPSEC. I'm going to violate OPSEC here and mention that I drive a Subaru, but I don't think it's 2016, but now I need to go check because I love my car, so I'm a little worried. And also speaking about mobile hotspots, it is also interesting just the sheer number of cars that runZero detects nowadays. Like I remember when I was looking through some of the data, it's like there's a fair amount of automobiles that are on people's networks, like a non-zero number. And I'm definitely of an age where if somebody said, oh yeah, in the future, cars will be on your corporate network, and I'll be like, are we making them? No. Okay, then why are they? But no, the future is now. I have to get a software update for my car, but yeah, I have to get a software update for my car, but it's too many generations behind on the national data cellular network. Wow, the future is weird. That's actually not something I would have expected to hear even just a few years ago. So yes, that is the runZero research report, or the pre-announcement of the runZero research report. It's going to be really fascinating. It is a lot of content, and it is really, really cool stuff. I highly, highly recommend y'all read it. It's insightful, it's entertaining, it's educational, it's all those words. Anything that was good that's in it, it was not written by me, but if it was, all the good stuff, smart people wrote it. So definitely take a chance and take a look at it. And now, I'd like to move on to the rapid response roundup. So this is, someone correct me if I'm wrong, this was the busiest rapid response month in maybe ever. I don't know if maybe ever, but it's been a lot. There were 13 rapid response posts since the last runZero hour, and all of them were big deals. Well, I say all of them. There's actually one. So there's this one at the top here that's conspicuously got a CVE of none and a CVSS of 5.3, which is not a super high number. My kids tell me that things like this are mid, which I think means mediocre. I'm not actually sure with their long hair and their rock music. I'm not up on the lingo. But yeah, this is not a super crazy high CVSS score. So why did we think it was interesting, HD?
So the folks who found it binarily, they did some research and realized that there's an old version of lighttpd, or lighty as they call it, that was part of the AMI mega rack BMCs, the kind of baseband lights out management component of the motherboard for these servers. In turn, Lenovo and Intel basically used the mega rack SDK and then shipped a version of the same BMC firmware with their versions of the servers. At some point, lighttpd had vulnerabilities. The versions got older, people patched it. And even though AMI upgraded the version that they shipped, the downstream vendors, Lenovo and Intel, did not. So their point, the binarily folks' point, was that even though it's a fairly small information leak, you can confirm whether a memory value exists or if a string of memory happens to exist to something you already know. The fact that it was not propagated all the way down to the bigger manufacturers was a problem with the supply chain itself. We looked at it from the runZero side and went, hey, wait a minute, like we see these old versions of lighttpd everywhere, not just on BMCs. Like BMCs are probably the smallest place we see them. So we went back and looked at like all the data in the platform, said, okay, what are the hardware platforms that are exposed by it? And we found something like 300 or 400 different hardware devices that were running these ancient versions of lighttpd. So we spent a little more time digging into the vulnerability and said, okay, what can we actually do with it? How bad is it? Let's throw a fuzzer at it again, let it run overnight. Like we spent a little bit more time just trying to make sure that there wasn't like some obvious kind of low-hanging fruit that was missed by the research. But no, the binarily folks did a great job of identifying what the risk was, which is pretty minor, but it was a really good example of the supply chain failing and there being a much wider impact to these outdated binaries than some folks may have suspected by looking at just a couple products.
And for the just to make sure everybody's on the same page, you said BMC. Do you want to explain just real quick what a BMC is?
Sure. BMC is a little backdoor in your server that allows other people to break into it remotely. That's the security practitioner viewpoint. But effectively, what it's supposed to be is a separate computer running on your motherboard allows you to turn your other computer off and on. So if you want to KVM into your server and reboot it, reinstall it, power it on, power it off, take all that fun stuff, You can do that through the BMC itself. These things are typically attached to the motherboard itself or an add-on card in some older versions. Other example is called like the Dell iDRAC, HP iLOs. They're all kind of the same thing. It's typically like an ARM-based Linux computer kind of welded to your motherboard that provides some kind of out of band access to the server hardware itself.
We heard you liked computers, so we put a computer in your computer, kind of thing. It actually,
we've been
it,
updated for 10 years. Yeah.
yep. For all the retro computing enthusiasts out there, it's almost like a front end processor, but it's not quite a front end processor. But I'm both revealing my age and just how nerdy my hobbies are. So I will. I do love retro computing though. If anybody wants to talk about retro computing, feel free to email me. And so yeah, lighttpd, and it's also and like HG said, it's embedded in a lot of places, like everywhere. I highly recommend you go check out the blog post that's linked there for lighttpd. The list of devices you scroll and scroll. It's really cool. It's really, I mean, we're talking about a vulnerability, so it's not cool, right? It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
To on the research report too, we're talking about a similarly ancient web server that's everywhere in the research report that we took kind of modern tools towards. So a lot of it is kind of like going back in time and hunting dinosaurs with machine guns. Like we're taking like modern computing fuzzing to then go after these like ancient web servers that are embedded in all kinds of hardware and find some interesting stuff. So really excited about that in the research report.
Yep. Hunting dinosaurs with machine guns. That's okay. That's not that. I need to see that movie. The other big news recently was the Palo Alto vulnerability in Panos or PanOS, or I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. And that was that's a big jump from 5.3 on our list to 9.8. So the vulnerability in broad strokes was a remote code execution vulnerability, a command injection vulnerability in several versions of the Palo Alto operating system. And HG, again, I don't want to pick on you, but I know that you had a lot you wanted to say about that. So fire away.
It's the Palo Alto vulnerability. It's not great when a security vendor has a almost 10.0 CVSS score in a default configuration of their product, right? It's not great. In this case, it gets a little bit worse. Like not only was the vulnerability really difficult to exploit unless you had enabled the corporate telemetry that sends data back to them, but when folks started digging into how the vulnerability occurred, it was just like a long series of missteps. Starting at the very front end of the process, right? You've got I think an Nginx configuration that redirected traffic into a other web server running on the machine as root. Well, that other web server that's running as root on that system was built with Go 1.13, a version that's 5 years out of date. So you have all the vulnerabilities in the Go stack exposed now through that route as well. To make things worse is they also used an old version of the Gorilla Sessions library, which is a commonly used package for doing cookie and session management. But they used it in a way that was a little bit broken. They used file system storage, so actually writing sessions to the file system, and they allowed the attacker or end user to specify the session ID, which the documentation says never, never, never do that. Because effectively it allows someone to read and write arbitrary files in your file system. So even ignoring all the telemetry stuff in Palo Alto, you can use just the root running Go-based web server running Gorilla Sessions to destroy the entire hard drive with one request. You can tell it just to overwrite the NVMe disk on the machine remotely and wipe out the machine or wipe out any other file you want because of this particular sequence of events with the Gorilla Sessions and that. So then you start digging down a little bit deeper. Okay, so how do we actually get code execution on that? The Watchtower folks wrote an amazing blog post about it that went into great detail. But effectively, there was a daemon on the system that every minute would go tail the log files. And then based on log files, it would then do a Python code would then push data back to the Palo Alto backend through telemetry. But instead of using the standard Python HTTP tooling, normal library stuff, they shelled out to the curl command. And the curl command was actually being run via bash. And if there is a backtick or similar code in the actual log file name itself, that would actually cause the command to run it directly. So effectively, if you can create a log on the system for Palo Alto and the telemetry system was running in the background, anytime there's a backtick in the log, it would basically root the box. And again, that code ran as root. So it was just a really nasty chain of events. It was the fact that you had this root running daemon in the first place, the fact that there's running an ancient version of Go that is using a known vulnerable version of Gorilla Sessions. One of the wild things, though, is when the Watchtower folks created the post, they accidentally or inadvertently, or at least less obviously, leaked to 0-day in the Gorilla Sessions library itself. So version 1.2.1 of Gorilla Sessions, which is the session management package, fixed a bug where you can do arbitrary file reads, but it did not fix an arbitrary file write. But the file write endpoint was only accessible if you did something silly like take the session ID directly from the user and put it directly into the API call, which they tell you not to do. So now folks are scrambling to figure out, well, what else out there is using Gorilla Sessions in a way that is vulnerable through the file system store and through a user supplied session ID. So there's lots of bonus ODA basically falling out of this. But yeah, the Palo Alto bug itself, both all the things that led to the log file getting created and the fact that you have RCE by parsing a log file is all terrible. And with any hope, that'll be the last time something that terrible happens there as they fix things going forward.
Yep. There's been vulnerabilities too. I remember having escape codes in log files, so when an administrator tails it controls their terminal and stuff like that. And back when you could get an Xterm to echo back the title and you could set the title and do whatever, and it was funny. There's actually been, as a little bit of an aside, there's been a renaissance in terminal emulators recently, and terminal emulators are near and dear to my heart. I at one point had the VT100 state machine diagram up, like printed out on my wall, because I was referring to it so much. And for a long time there were vulnerabilities. There was I found one many years ago in the terminal on Mac OS, where you could send it honored the Xterm and DT term resize escape sequences, but it wouldn't check. It would check if you did it using certain ones but not others if the number was negative or too big, and so you could actually send a negative size and it would explode things, and that was really interesting. And then also at the time it would accept it would automatically open telnet URLs without prompting. So if you just had like a web page that just had like an image source of telnet, and then it would pop open the terminal and then connect to it and then echo back down, whatever. Anyway, that was really interesting. But what's interesting too is Xterm used to have a vulnerability where you could change the Xterm title and then request the Xterm title be echoed back. And so you could actually, put rmrf / boom, and then echo it back, and it would get echoed back onto the command line. And so now that functionality is disabled by default. But a lot of these newer terminal emulators that are coming out, they are trying to honor as much of these escape sequences as possible, control sequences as possible, and they've reintroduced some of these problems. They're actually re-echoing, doing things like that, which I thought was really neat, because I love that there's this renaissance in terminal emulation. I'm probably the only person who's ever said those words, but I really do. And so it's interesting that we're kind of making the same mistakes. It's like when we had when IPv6 stacks became popular became more widespread, and what was the one you could forge a ping packet IPv4, and then the same thing happened with IPv6. The same thing would happen on both stacks. Tom is smiling because I think he remembers this.
Talking about like a re-implementation of ping of death?
Yeah, no, I think it was a land attack. I don't remember. Maybe it was Smurf. I don't know. It's been a long time, but it's always fun that sort of the oldies come roaring back, which is something we talk about a little bit in the research report, that the old enemies are still around. Also on our oh yes, HD, thank you. Yeah, it's really cool, the iTerm stuff. Yeah, there's iTerm, yeah, it supports it can even read in a certain image format. I can't remember what, and display it, and that's really neat. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Sixel, but anyway. Sorry, that was a big digression. I apologize, but I mentioned retro computing, and then we got on retro computing, and it's really fascinating. So also this month on the rapid response, we have an old D-Link vulnerability. And I thought this was interesting because it again kind of highlights an issue in the supply chain. So what's going on with D-Link is they had a family of network attached storage devices in the DNS family, which, by the way, that didn't get confusing when I was doing research. I'm like, okay, DNS. I no, not that DNS, the other DNS kind of thing. But these devices are really widespread, and they are kind of a workhorse network attached storage device. And they're very common in small offices, small businesses, home use, that sort of thing. But they had a vulnerability they had a command injection vulnerability that basically lets you just run arbitrary code. And it was a big deal because these devices are past their end of life. I think the last one entered end of life in 2022, but don't quote me on that. But that means that updates will not be coming, but these devices are still very, very widespread. And they're used in a lot of environments where there isn't necessarily a formal security procedure or security team or anything like that. So I thought it was particularly apropos that we have these devices that are end of life with a vulnerability discovered post end of life, still widely deployed. I think it's a good sort of illustration of the risks of these kinds of things. And so I thought that was really neat to mention. Before we go any more into the rapid response roundup, I did want to give Blaine a chance because I don't want to run out of time. Blaine has some really interesting things. He's been really digging into the rapid response procedure and everything, and I wanted to let him kind of take the floor and talk a little bit about the once and future rapid response. So Blaine?
Sure, yeah. Like you said earlier, there was 13 coming out this month, and like me being so new, I certainly got hit by all of that. So that was really fun to get. Yeah, it was a whirlwind, but like it definitely like showed me how you guys worked and how we actually do the responses to all these CVs that come out, and how we want to alert our vendors, our customers, and the community when stuff like this happens. So part of all of that was digging into the internal tooling, how we find the affected devices with those queries, and how we actually notify our customers. And so I started taking a stab at how do we make this even more rapid so we can respond even better to you guys, right? And so yeah, teasing out all that, we're able to get like the queries to run a little bit quicker so that we can do our investigatory work a little quicker. We could find out like how bad these things actually are, how big the blast radius is, and then start to actually notify our customers immediately when that happens, instead of us waiting to write the blog post and you happen to find that on your RSS feed or a LinkedIn post. We're able to fire those off directly to our customers in the short term, and then eventually we'll be able to let our customers sort of set up a dedicated email, like a security email address, if they wanted to start getting those notifications. And then sort of like from there, like the sky's the limit at that point. Like if we could start to use this data and stick this in front of our customers' eyes in their own dedicated dashboards as they get written, and we can push these queries out as soon as they happen and as soon as we find them, just like, because we know time is of the essence as soon as the stuff gets released. So sooner we can get that stuff into our customers' eyes, the better.
Yeah, a very proactive rapid response. We call it what's rapider than rapid? I'm not really sure. So,
yeah, and we want to like make this stuff easier for ourselves too, because there is a very large human element to all of this. This is very hard to automate. Like there's a lot of investigation work that everybody in this team has had to do, even with just these 13, reading other blog posts and doing the fuzzing and doing that work. And the last thing that we want to do is have tools and processes just like get in the way that make that longer. So the easier that we can make this on ourselves, the better for everybody involved.
Yep. I mean, I learned how to write code so that I wouldn't have to actually do anything twice. That's the whole point, right? Do it once, get it right. Yep, I agree. No, that's fascinating, and that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more on that front. It's really because rapid response is, I think, one of the most valuable things that we can do, right, to actually make sure our customers know potentially what's going on out there, and how you can use runZero to find these devices that are these products that are potentially compromisable, in your network. You can't defend what you don't know you have, right? You can't defend what you don't. Yeah. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so I want to. All right, we've got a little bit of time left. I want to leave a little bit for questions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the flip side to rapid response too is we don't want to send you a million alerts when they're not actionable. So we want to make sure that if we're going to bother you about something, it should be something that directly affects you, that you should care about, that is not going to be wasting your time. End of the day, the thing that's most important is your time, right? If you're defending a network, you can't spend your time chasing down whatever the latest security company is currently pitching is the end of the world. You need to know whether that affects you, whether it's actually relevant, and that's our goal. So on one hand, we want to make sure that we get you information as quickly as we possibly can. On the other hand, we don't want to waste your time chasing things that aren't relevant.
Yep. And disclosure is important, but yeah, I think there is some overzealousness with some disclosure saying, the world is actually ending. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. It's important to have some advice on that front. So we also, popping the conversation stack, going back to the rapid response roundup, we also have noticed an uptick in rapid response and just critical vulnerabilities in OT devices, operational technology, industrial control system devices, OTICS. These are, as they become increasingly more connected and converged into IT networks, right? Like it used to be OT networks used to be kind of their own thing, and IT networks were their own thing, and now more and more OT networks are falling under IT networks and falling directly under the responsibility of the CISO. And the term, of course, is convergence, which has meant different things over the years. But in this context, we're talking about the convergence of OT and IT networks. And so I only included a few on this slide, but there was a pretty big uptick, just a pretty big chunk of security advisories for OT devices just over the past month. Automation Direct, Rockwell, Siemens had quite a few. And so that was an interesting time. I recommend that y'all go read these blog posts because they're both informative and it can kind of give you a feel for the information security landscape, just where vulnerabilities are happening and what kinds of things are being targeted. You'll notice as well, Ivanti had several more CVEs. They've had quite a few vulnerabilities lately. These border gateway devices are a prime target. A lot of activity is happening around them. Every time I say border gateway, I think BGP, and that's not what this is, but yes. So really, really worth looking into. So, and if you have any border gateway devices, definitely make sure that they are secure. And so I think we're almost at the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and let y'all know that next month is going to be a special research report focused runZero hour. So if you want to hear all about the cool research that the research team has been working on, be sure to tune in. There's a registration link there, and I believe it's also in the chat. And be sure to register that. We'd love to see you. The research report itself is going to have a little bit of a launch event, so there's a URL for that as well. Please check that out, because we would love for you to read it. It is really a cool thing. I mean, I say that, but I mean, it really is. I really think it's cool. So I would love for you to read it. And for it to, give us feedback. We would love to hear what you think. We want this to be a sort of a two-way communication street. And then also don't forget that if you're going to be in San Francisco early next month, HD and I are going to be out there. I actually managed to get a flight. That was a bit of an exciting time. So yeah, we'll be there, and I would love to see you. So yeah, be sure to come out and see us. And so with that, are there any further questions? Anything anybody wants to add? All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out. This has been a lot of fun to talk with y'all. Be sure to drop us any emails or questions you might have, any feedback you have, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, I want to thank you. Say have a great day, y'all.
Thanks, y'all. See you next month.
See you.